Hello, all my JavaScript friends. This is the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith, and this is Fun with JavaScript, our race game. Okay, in this video, we're going to be taking a look at the very first page of our race game, in which we take 8 cars and select 4 of them to run the race. To give you an idea of what we're going to be doing here is we're going to be doing the page you see in front of you. It's a very simple little page. We're going to take each one of these particular cars here, these 8 different colors, and we're going to drag and drop them into the different slots. And once we have a car inside the slot, our little race button will appear, in which we click on the race button. It then goes to the race page. In this, we're going to be creating a service, and I'll explain that a little bit in more detail a little bit later on. We're going to be creating a service that will control both the slots and the cars that are listed at the bottom. So if you're ready, let's get going. This is where we left off. This was basically our very simple hello world page, so let's just get started with that. And so the first thing we want to do is we want to go ahead and start up our development server. That will be npm run dev. And it will tell us that we can access everything at localhost 3000. So let's access localhost 3000 and see what happens. Yep, there we are, and that's exactly what we had before. So let's just take this one step at a time. First thing we're going to want to do here is let's reconfigure our directory entries just a little bit, because we're going to basically have 2 pages here. We're going to have the home page and the race page, and so I want to keep the JavaScript separated from the JavaScript separate. So I want to keep the JavaScript separated from the home page and the graphics page, the race page, because there's a ton of JavaScript going to be associated with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to go into the JavaScript section here. We're going to create a new directory, and we're going to call that directory home. And let's go ahead and move our home.js into home. Yep, refactor that one. Okay, and we're also going to, well, let's don't create race yet. Really all we need is just the home one for right now. And of course we have our home.html, index.html right there. Everything should still be working fine there, and notice that it does not. So what has happened here? Well, obviously we've changed the location of our JavaScript file, and it didn't quite make it over to our new directory. So it's JS home. That should do it. Controlled S it, and yep, there we are. Now I'm seeing the JavaScript file. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at this thing one at a time. Let's take a look at the HTML file itself. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy and paste the code that I have in my FWJS.race. And again, the repository, as it's noted at the bottom of the screen here, is FWJS-race. It is a public repository. You're free to take a look at it. The code that I am running off of here is in branch release-0.0.3. So make sure you go to there if you want to kind of follow along or actually see our final product here that we're doing on the videos. Alrighty, so we have this. The big thing here is that we got the style sheet. It's no big deal. Still got the icon, no big deal there. I've got myself a little header. I don't care about that. The important thing here is how this looks. And this basically is to select the cars. This is going to be our slots, and this is going to be our car list. So the idea here is we have 4 slots all the time, and we're going to have to make sure we put all 4, we fill in all 4 slots. And so we have hard-coded all 4 slots here. Now, the car list, however, we could have more than just 8 cars. In the example I showed you, I had 8 cars. Well, you could have more, you could have less, depending upon the situation. So I'm leaving that blank for right now, and then I have the JavaScript file roll that in for me. And in reality, we would eventually also want to be able to say, hey, there's only going to be 2 slots for this race, because we only have 2 cars or 3 cars or 5 cars or 6 cars, so we may want to change that too. For right now, we're going to hard code it for 4. That will be for a later point in time once we finish with the POC. And then finally, here's the race button itself, and I am hiding it. I'll have the JavaScript open it up once all 4 slots are available. And then finally, I'm bringing in my home.js file. So if we save that, take a look at it, it's going to be like junk. Yep, see, obviously it's junk because, first of all, we don't have any CSS there. The JavaScript's obviously not there, so right now it looks like junk. So let's bring in the CSS itself, or actually the post CSS file. So that's an FWJS race. This is our old one that we use for the hello world. Let's just take our new one, throw it in there. And I'm not going to go through a lot of what this is, but very important is that first of all, I have a hidden here. This is the way we can hide and show elements really quickly by using the cast list on each of the elements. By adding the adding the class hidden, it automatically will hide that element, and by removing the class hidden, it will automatically put the element back on there. And so this is very easy way of being able to hide and show things. So that was the reason why in my index.html file, I initially have the class hidden on the race button, because at first there are no cars within the slots. And so now what we want to be able to do is that once all the cars get in the slots, we will remove the hidden class, having the JavaScript do that, and that will boop, automatically make the race appear. Other things, it's going to be really, much of this is really not a big deal here, but you can see kind of a nice little thing here about the car slots on how post CSS works, is that I can now indent, well not indent, but I can, what's the best word for it? Well, we'll just call it indent for right now. We can indent each of the different children. So the divs that are a child of car slots, I have them indented. The div.full and the span are each children of car slots. So this is a lot easier to read than having to say car slot space div or and then car slot space div. For example, car slots space div for that one, car slots space div.full for that one, car slots space span for that one. Let's see if I got one that's got 3 of them in a row here. Yeah, here's a really good one. Here's header. Here's a very good one where you can see the post CSS here. This would have been header space h1. This would have been header space aside. This would have been header space aside space a. And that can get a little confusing to look at it. It's if you're used to looking at indented code like you do with HTML, with JavaScript and all that, having your CSS indented too just makes everything a lot easier to maintain in the future. So this is why I'm using post CSS. Again, it will be part of the specifications eventually, but for right now we're having to use plugins so Vite can know exactly what to do with it. I've got a lot of color definitions up here. These are the different, this is my color scheme that I use for all of my websites, the Virtuoids websites, including Fun With JavaScript, which I can now completely redoing because Vuetify just came out. So we'll get all that, that's immaterial here. But basically, this is just a very simple little CSS file just to kind of get things up and running. So if we save it, now it looks a little bit better. This looks exactly like the original one. Look, I've got my 4 slots here, but what about the cars and what about the race button? Well, there are no cars there because if we take a look at the index.html, the car list is blank and the class on the race button is hidden, which means the race is still there, but there are no cars. We'll have the JavaScript do all of that. We're spending a lot of time working on the JavaScript here to get this all one step at a time. Let's now take a look at the JavaScript, but before we do, let's take a look at the design of this overall page. Now, the JavaScript is going to be controlling a lot of what's happening on the screen itself, and I've got that split up into 5 different sections. I've got the main file, which is what we're looking at here, and obviously we'll be changing what we've got because this is my hello world JavaScript here. I now also have a class that will control all of the different slots that we have here. So each slot will have its own instance of this particular class, and it will communicate with something to be able to say, hey, do I display a card here? Or, hey, I'm now deleting a card. What do I need to do? The second thing we're going to take a look at here is the car list itself. Now, if you remember in our original video that I showed you at the very beginning here, we had a list of cars down the middle of the screen. And those lists of cars, basically, each one of those will have its own little instance, and it will represent the cars that we can then drag from that one space up into the slots themselves so that it can control all the dragging and dropping. The third part is what we call a car service. And this service is going to be the bread and butter for all of this system here. Did I say third part? That's actually the fourth part. So basically the service will communicate with both the slots and with the cars themselves and handle all the communications that go with the slots and the cars. So the car service will be inserted to each one of the slots and inserted into each one of the cars so that they would have a common ancestor to be able to communicate with and to be able to say, hey, I've now deleted a car from a slot, or hey, I've got all 4 slots done, or hey, I've just now drug a car from the cars list up to a slot. And then finally, the last part will be what we call the local storage. So once we hit the race button, we got to be able to tell the next page what cars are listed. So we're going to be creating a small little database, for lack of a better term, inside our local storage. And I'll let you take a look at local storage, or look it up in local storage when we get to it on MDM or something like that. But local storage allows us to be able to save variables from this particular page that then can be read by another page. But those are basically the 5 parts. The main program, which will be loading everything up, the car classes, which will represent the cars which we drag and drop, the slots, which will represent each one of the slots, the service, which will control absolutely everything and manage all the interaction between the slots and the cars, and the local storage, which will be the data that we send into the browser to be able for the race file, which we'll cover in other videos, to be able to read and do whatever it needs to do. So let's get at it. First of all, the home. Let's take a look and see what the home is going to look like. And through the magic of television, there it is. We're going to be importing the service from our car service, which we haven't created yet. This is the data we're going to use. Now, eventually what you'll want to do is probably, load this data in from a database somewhere. For instance, if you have an Amazon account, you can get it from the S3 storage, through a Lambda operation or something like that. However you get the data, it doesn't matter. Again, this is a proof of concept, so I'm hard coding the data in here. So I've got 8 cars here, each one with a certain color, a certain ID, and a model. And that model will tell it what model car it's going to use here. And you can either use what we call the base model, or the low poly car model, or the Cybertruck model. We'll get into that when we start talking about the race page, in which case we'll talk about the cars when we get to the race page itself. We're going to instantiate a new car service and pass it to car data. We're going to get that car list data, and then we're going to tell the car service to populate the car list. And once it's done that, we just let it do whatever it has to do, because it's going to control everything for us. So that's all there really is to the main home.js that is called from the HTML itself. So let's take a first look at the different classes. There's going to be a class to cover the different cars at which we're going to do the drag and drop operation. So let's take a look at that next. That's going to be, we're going to call that one CarListItem.js. And let's pop some code inside here. All right, there we are, CarListItem. Now again, CarListItem deals with all of the different cars that are responsible for the drag and drop. So basically, when we create a CarListItem, I'm going to be passing it the car it's going to create, and that's going to be gotten from, eventually the service is going to be able to get that from the database, because the service is actually going to be creating all this stuff. We're going to call it right here, but the service itself is going to create everything. So, and then it's going to pass the service itself, and that will allow each item to be able to contact back the service and say, hey, I've got to do something here. I got a drag and drop operation. You deal with it. I don't want to deal with it. You deal with it. This allows us, of course, to separate the slots and the cars. Just a little simple getter function here. A little simple list item here. This list item basically, what we will be doing with the index.html is that we're going to be producing an HTML li item here. So this is going to be able to allow us to build that li item automatically. And what that is, we're just going to create the element, set the attribute to draggable true, and that's something that the drag and drop operation requires us to do. So it knows that it can drag a certain object. We're going to set the ID of it. We're going to append the car image to that, and we'll get to the car image once we create the car. We'll get to the car image once we create the car class, and then we're going to add an event listener called drag start. And a drag start basically allows us to be able to say, hey, this person has started a drag operation. If they have started it, then handle the drag start. And then we just save the list item and we're done. So that way, now that when we populate the list item, when the service calls the populate list item, which is what we are calling, populate car list. So when the car service says populate car list, it's going to grab all those LIs and immediately pop them into the UL. All right. This allows me to hide the car. Actually, I'm not using that one. This allows me to show. I'm not using that. It allows me to append. I'm not using that one either. This is for some functions that I've put in there for an eventuality to saying, hey, I'm going to need to have a little bit better control over what happens with the list item instead of just having the picture of the car there. There may be more things there, and so I may want to just hide and show it on my own. Ended up not using them, so I should have removed them, but that's the way it is. Here's the handle drag start. The really important thing about dragging, I'm not going to go into great details about drag and drop here, but basically once you start a drag and drop, you need to be able to tell the destination what type of data you have there. And I'm telling the destination I have a text of plain, and that text is going to be the ID. And so what happens when I drop it into the slot, there's going to be code in the slot class that's going to say, hey, I've got a drop for a drag here. What do I want to do with it? So what it's going to do is it's going to read the data. And once it gets that data, it's going to say, oh, it's a text plain data. Therefore, I'm going to have a target ID. Now, you can actually have other types of data. All the data is based upon this format, which looks a lot like a MIME type. So, you know, text plain, text / image, whatever you want to there, whatever format you want to do, it's basically a key value pair. And so I'm putting text plain here, and I'm going to put the ID. And that's going to become very important, because it's that ID that I'm going to be able to communicate, say, this is the green car, this is the red car, this is the white car, the black car, blah, 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 and so on and so forth. And then I'm going to tell the drop effect is going to be move. So I'm going to tell it, hey, as you're dragging it, use the move effect. Again, I'm not going to go through everything about drag and drop right now, but that's something, if you want to get into, MDM has it. Eventually I'll probably produce a video that handles just drag and drop by itself. So, you know, always check my Virtuoid channel here to make sure, you know, to see if we do have some sort of videos like that. But that's basically all there is for the list item. This is everything I need to know for each car within the list. How to display it, which is the LI, and what to do in case a drag operation starts, which is what that is down there. Next, let's take a look at the car slots. Now, this will be the code that will handle whatever happens when a car gets dropped onto a slot. So let's go ahead and let's create that file. That's going to be called CarSlotItem. And again, it's going to be a class. So let's pop some code inside there. And through the magic of television, here it is. So this is basically our CarSlots program. The big thing here is that we've got to be able, there's couple things here. We got to be able to tell it when a drag operation is going to stop, or when a drag operation is dropped into a slot. We also need to be able to populate it with the picture of the car and a big red X so that they can then be able to remove that car from the slot at an eventual time, and some way for it to be able to tell the service that, hey, I'm now occupied, so that eventually the service will say, hey, all 4 of my slots are occupied. Let's activate that race icon and let's go ahead and race. So that's basically what all this does here, is that we, well, let's just go through one step at a time here. Here are the different event listeners that we need to handle for the drag operations. The first one is the drag over. The first one is the drag over. I know it's listed second, but it's the first one. And basically it says, what's going to happen when I am dragging over this particular slot? Do I want it to do anything in particular? And that's where that is handled. And then the big one is this one right here. And that's once I have a drop event, that means I've released the mouse and I am dropping that car into the slot. What do I want to do? And we'll cover that in a second. Well, actually, heck, let's just cover it right now. Okay, and the next thing we're going to find the delete icon, and then we're going to put a click event onto that whenever we click on the delete icon. So if we take a look at our index.html file, here's the 4 things here. We've got a span class equals hidden, data ID equals something, and then the big red X. That's the HTML entity for the big red X. So notice it has a class equals hidden right here. So that's why you're not seeing it inside of the inside of the browser. And oh, okay, yeah, of course it's going to give you, I was going to show it to you, but of course it's going to give you an error because we haven't done the service yet. Yeah, this is how good the development server is. It recognized I had an error, and instead of just trying to do whatever it could with it, it just said, hey, dummy, you got an error right here. I love this. I love this development server. It's really, really nice. So, can't show it to you, but if you remember correctly, it had 4 red rectangles there, and each of those 4 red rectangles basically has 2 sections in it. It has this tiny little section in between the span and the div, which is where the SVG is going to be for the car, and then of course the big red X that is right there. So what we're doing in slot items is with this section right here is that we're hooking into that delete icon, and we're setting up a click event. So when we click on it, we're going to do what? We're going to remove the car. So this is the big thing here is that what are we going to do when we drag over? What are we going to do when we drop? And what are we going to do when we click on that red X? So let's take a look at drag over first. So we go to drag over. What happens to drag over? That's pretty much it right there. We're just going to do a drop effect move, which is going to change the icon. We're just going to ensure that as they're dragging over, that the move is still in effect. That's all we're doing at that point. The big thing here is the drop. What happens when we drop? Well, here's the drop. So let's do a drop. We get the data text plain. Remember, when we did the car list item and we did the drag start, we set the text plain format to the ID of the car, which happened to be stored as the ID of the target, which is inside the LI. Because if we take a look at the LI, when we do the LI here, we've set the ID to the car. Therefore, the event.target.id gives us the ID of the car. This is where we use that get data. So now car ID is going to have the ID of the car. We go to the service because we have access to the service. So we say, service, can you get me this car, please? And the service says, sure, yeah, here's the car. And once it gets the car, we add the car. We call our add car routine, and we add the car to the slot. And then we call the service and say, service, we've added the car. Everything is nice and comfortable and everything. So you can get rid of that car. You don't have to worry about that car anymore. So what the service will do is that, if you notice in the demo at the very beginning, is that once we dragged it up to the slot, it disappeared from the bottom. So we basically tell the service to remove that car once you're done with it. So what does our add car do? Well, first of all, is that if we already have a car ID, we remove the car. That actually should never ever happen, but just in case it does, it does. So I mean, you could basically, actually what you could do is you can drag and drop over another one and it will replace it. I just suddenly remembered. I think that's why I coded for there, but I've never tried that before. So I don't know if that's going to work or not. Maybe that's something we'll try once we finish up the video. Doesn't really matter. Okay, so we remove the car if there's already a car ID associated with this slot, because this represents one slot. We're going to set the car ID to ID. We're going to prepend the car image to the DOM. And our car class, which we haven't created yet, which we'll create here next, will have a car image, and that will be the SVG of that particular car. And the prepend will basically say, hey, once we get a DOM, I want you to, instead of appending it, which appends it at the very end of any of the children, it's going to prepend, which will prepend it to the beginning of the children. So what it's going to do here is that this is the div it's pointing to. Prepend says, take all the children, and it prepend it, put it before the children. So what it's going to do, it's going to put it between the div and the span. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Alrighty, it's going to set the attribute of data ID on the big red delete icon X to the ID of the car, so that when we click on that delete icon, it will know which ID has been clicked upon. And then we remove the hidden token from the X, and that makes the X reappear. So that's all there is to the add car. So when we drop the car, that's all we have to do from the add car. All right. Remove the car. In case we ever have to remove the car, we set the car ID, we add the hidden back in there, we clear the car ID, and then we go back to the service and say, service, hey, we need to add this car back in. Could you please add this car back in? The service says, sure, yeah, and it will then add it back into its list. And this to object was something I thought I was going to need and ended up not needing at all. Same thing with car ID here. I ended up not needing to get the car ID. Although we really didn't have, I just suddenly realized that when we click, we really didn't have to do that. I'm sorry, when we click on it, we remove the car, we really didn't have to get the, put the car ID instead of data ID. We could have just gotten it from here, but again, those are kind of the things you think about as you code here, and as I'm going over here, I'm thinking, oh, I could have done that better, I could have done this better. That's just part of development work. You make a note of it, you get to it. So how do you make a note of it? Well, we just come inside here and we do something like this. To do, oh, no, I don't want, yeah, I'm sorry. To do No need to save ID to data ID. And then on the click event, let's see, where's that click event? That click event is remove car. So in the remove car, we're going to put a to-do. Oops. We're going to put a to-do here and then remove car, saying to-do, get car ID from the instance. And now I also, this is added to my live ID here, but now I need to go ahead and add it to my FWJS. So give me a minute. Okay, I'm back. I've added it now to my FWJS race, so I can make those changes a little bit later on so that the changes there will work with what we have here. But that's all there really is to the car slot item. So we've now covered the car slots. We covered the cars themselves. Let's get to the actual car that belongs, that SVG car that belongs in both the slots and in the list. All right, let's do the car next. So we'll create a new JavaScript file called car. It's blank, so let's bring it in. Enter the magic of television. There it is. Okay. Really big file here. And the only reason it's really big here is that we've got the SVG here that draws out the car itself. So I've got a couple pieces of information. The first file is just some simple SVG data. I've got some metadata here. And this metadata here, notice, has who created it. This particular SVG file was created by a particular artist. They've put it out there for everybody to use if you use it for personal use only, which is what we're doing here. This is personal use only, so we're completely free to use it. It is extremely important when you're using graphics and things like that is that you have the correct license. If I was to use this particular license in my business or something like that, I would have to contact this Peter Selinger person, and I would have to get permission to be able to do that. And I've done that before with some of the fonts. The Virtuoid font that I have, I actually reached out to the person who created it in Germany and actually paid for permission to use it because I knew I was going to use it in my professional work. Same thing here. This is just personal for this presentation and for your particular presentation there, so it's perfectly legal to use this, but it is important that you give credit to the artist. And I can't emphasize that enough. Always give credit to the artist. They've put a lot of work into this thing. It looked good. Give credit to them. That's just really what it comes down to. Be nice to people. It's really that simple. So I've got all that data there, and that's very important for when we actually build the SVG model. The construction is very simple. I'm passing name, color, ID, and model, which is basically what the 4 pieces of information that I have inside of my home.js that I'm getting inside my fake database. Let's see, I've got my getters functions there, no big deal. Really, the only really important thing is this get car image. And the reason that's important is that SVG file needs to have basically 2 things. The first one needs to be available. It needs to have an actual SVG file, but it also needs to be able to have the different colors associated with it. If we go back to the SVG itself, I've got a little place marker in here called -- fill color -- and that allows me to that when I create the SVG file, it allows me, here it is right here, to be able to change the color, be able to replace that fill color with whatever color I have passed when I constructed this particular instance of the car. So what this does here is that if I don't have an SVG file already created for this particular car, I create a new SVG file. Notice I'm using create element namespace because I got it. SVG is not an HTML namespace, so which is the default if you use create element. I'm having to use create element namespace and pass it in a namespace in there. And then past that, it's just setting attributes, inserting HTML, and then saving the SVG file itself. And that's very important because when I copy the LIs, when I create the LIs for the car list or drop it into the slot, in fact, let's just take a look at that. When I create the LIs, I get the car image to be able to append it on the LIs. The same thing with the slot items is that when I drop it, drop, where's it? No, it's in the add car. I'm sorry, my bad. When I do the add car here, I'm also going to prepend the car image within the DOM itself. And that's going to allow us to be able to have different car images for each of the different instances just based upon the changing of the color. That's all there is to it. There is absolutely nothing else. Eventually, this car is going to handle a lot more than just this. It's going to read the entire database that's associated with the car. It's going to keep statistics, all that kind of fun stuff. And it's going to have a whole bunch of reporting eventually. And that's what I kind of envision. If I was to envision this thing to be this rock solid, beautiful program, that's basically what it's going to do. All I really care about right now is just having an SVG image so that I can have something to drag and drop. That's it. That's all there really is to it. So that takes care of our car list, our car slot, and our car itself. Let's get to the biggie, the one that controls the whole thing. Let's get to the car service. Okay, on the car service, what do we do there? Well, we create a new file called car service. And it's going to be a class, so let's bring up the car service. Let's copy paste from project and throw it in there. A little bit more here than normal there. Now remember, the car service is what controls everything. In my home.js, I create a new car service and pass it its car data. And then I basically say, hey, I want you to populate the list on the car data. In reality, what I should say here is CarService.go instead of this, but that's just the way it was. This is the way I have it for the proof of concept. That's for later on when we clean things up, but you haven't even seen it yet, so how do you really know? So let's do the car service here. I'm defining the number of slots. It's hard-coded to 4. Eventually, we will not want to hard code that one. This is what happens when we construct it. So when we construct it, I get the car data, save it off. I get the ID of the race button. And the service is going to control the race button, the slots, and the list. It's going to call one called create cars, and that's going to create all of my different cars that will be saved within the cars variable here. Then it's going to create all the different list items, and that's going to create the listing of the cars that you see up on the screen. Then it's going to call the create car slots, which is going to create all the different slots at the very top. And then it's going to do an add event listener for, and then it's going to do an add event listener for the click event to do the start race, and it will start the race. So that will finish it off. So let's take a look at these 3 biggies here one at a time. The first thing we do is that when we construct it, it's going to create the cars. And to create the cars is very quick here. We're going to create a whole new map there, and we're going to go through the car data and just flip through each one of them. We're going to extract the name, color, ID model and pass that as a new car and set it within the map. That's it. And of course, we'll use the map to be able to grab the IDs and grab the SVG images, or grab the actual cars themselves, to be able to then grab the SVG file and do all kind of fun stuff. And then of course we save that off. So no biggie there. All right, create the list items. So we then create the list items. There they are. Exact same thing here. We just go through each one of the cars and we create a new list item. And we set that list item into a file called list items. And this will allow us to keep all the different list items available for us to be able to move in and out of the list item as we see fit. Again, no big deal there. And then we have the create car slots. So we create the car slots. Same thing. We're going to flip through all the different slots, and then we're going to we're going to create slot items. And then set the slots for I. We're going to set the slots with an index based upon I. And so this is the reason we're actually doing a for loop here, because we actually need to count numbers. Instead of up here, we did it by car ID, so it's no big deal. But down here, we're going to have to do it numbers 1, 2, 3, and 4, so it will correspond to the different number of slots. So this is the only place where we don't have just a simple little for each iteration on the different car data or the cars or whatever. This will basically, this is where we just do a simple little for loop here so we can get indexes 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we've created all 3 of those. Our home.js will populate the card list. This will basically allow me to be able to append to our list element. After I clear it all out, we append to it. That will display all the different cars at the bottom of the screen. That will display the race. So at that point, it does absolutely nothing else. So how does all of this work? Well, once we have the cars created, list items created, the car slots created, it just basically depends upon the slots. The list items or the list of the cars, dropping the cars onto the list, onto the slots. So what happens? Well, when we drop onto the car slots, notice it gets the car from the service, but then removes the car from the list. So when it calls the car service, it's going to call remove car from list. And so what happens is we get the ID, we hide it, just to kind of get rid of it. But then we call something called activate race, and that's very important. When we go to activate race, first of all calls to make sure all the slots full. And on are slots full, it takes a look at each one of the car slots and determines whether the car slot has an ID. If it has an ID, then slots full continues to be true. If it doesn't have an ID, then slots full is immediately going to go to false. When it goes to false, it's basically going to say, hey, if it's false, we're going to keep the hidden flag on the race button. But if as soon as it goes true, we're going to remove the hidden flag from the race button itself. And that occurs anytime you remove a car from list, which basically means that you have sat there and have dropped something onto the slot, which is what this car does right here. And the other part is the add car to list will also do it, and that only occurs if you click on the X button for inside the slot. So basically, once anything gets dragged into the slot or once an X occurs, either this remove car from list or this add car to list will get called, which you call activate race. And again, activate race tests to make sure whether the slots are full or not. If it is full, then it removes the hidden, which makes the hidden appear. Otherwise, it adds the hidden class, in which case the hidden is basically the race button is hidden. So what happens when you click? Well, very, very simple. Once you get a click, we're going to create an array of slots in which we're going to push the slot index and the car itself. And this is where we use the toObject on the car. This is the only place where we created a toObject and actually, and actually used it. I had created a toObject on list items and on car slot items and never used it. But here's a case where we actually use it, and we've put the toObject in there, which basically does for lack of a better term, a JSON stringify, and that we have that slot and that car. That gives us an array of slots. And then we put it inside session storage. Now earlier I said we put it inside local storage. I forgot that I had changed the session storage just at the last minute. So we actually put it inside session storage. Yay! So inside session storage, we set an item called FWJS race, in which we stringify all the different slots. That's going to put it inside the session storage. And then we change the location to race.html, which will begin the race. And that program will then go over to race.html, we'll grab the information from session storage, set up all the cars, grab all the models, and the race will begin. So it looks like I got a feeling, make sure I have Control S everything here, which I believe I have. Our file should now run. Yep, there it is. Oh, actually, it didn't run. Let's just refresh, make sure. Yeah, okay, I just had to refresh. So I've refreshed there. There's our cars. Remember I said I think you can just drag on top of another car and automatically replaces it, and I couldn't remember. Well, let's just find that out. So red on top of green. It does do it. Oh, gosh, I am so good. Anyway, so we got red, blue. Let's raise him. Let's raise him. And then we click on the race button, which I'm not going to click on that because we don't have the next file. But that might be interesting. So then we hit the X. Obviously, it removes it from the slot. But notice, once we remove it from the slot, the race button has now completely disappeared. So let's pop Greenie back in there. And then what we'll do is let's click on the race button. And of course, it's going to say localhost can't be found. Let's check something here. I'm going to check to see if it wrote it inside session storage. Okay, it did not. Let's backspace since I'm still in my session here. Let's backspace. Yep, it sure did. Okay, so let me roll this into our screen here. Yep, there it is. Hopefully you can see it well enough. Yeah, here's our session storage, FWJS race, which is what we called it. There's the value. It's just a simple string. And then I can use a JSON parse on it inside race to be able to get the slot numbers and the cars. So slot number 1 was Green Ghost, was it? Yeah, we had done the left curly bracket, so we didn't left curly bracket. We did the left arrow, so of course it reset what's on the screen there, but it haven't reset the session storage yet. So so number 1 was Green Ghost, number 2 was the Blue Bull, number 3 was the Pink Piranha, and number 4 was the Cyan Cat. So as you can tell, I've passed the color, the ID, and the model. on each one of these. So I've passed the data that I think is going to be important to the race to be able to do the correct code for bringing up all the beautiful, gorgeous models that I have on the POC on the race. So that pretty much gives you everything there is on the code for the home page. So again, there's the home page. Very simple. Drag and drop operations. We got a class for each one of the cars, which right now just contains SVG. We got a class for each one that defines the instances for each one of the slots, which defines what happens when we drag over or drop a car onto the slot, and what happens when we click on the X. We have a class for each one of the cars, each one of the car list items down here, which will basically control that, hey, I've started a drag operation, or do I need to remove the car, or do I need to add the car back into this list here to show up on the screen. And then finally, we have a service which controls absolutely everything, determines when the slots are full, and when they are full, allow us to actually do the race and put the data inside SessionStorage. So that completes this video on our homepage. Our next video is going to start the really fun stuff in which we talk about how to get that POC working on the race itself. If you like this video, please click on the like button below or subscribe to this channel for more wonderful content. We're trying to get 1 million subscribers by February of 2042. But thank you so very much for watching. This is the Virtuoid, aka Mike Smith. We'll see you later.